All right, we are back on another episode of Okay and listen, I could not do this podcast without doing an episode about something that has changed my entire life. PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. I was diagnosed about a year ago, and it's time to talk about it because Black women are disproportionately affected by PCOS. And so I thought I couldn't have any other person than Tianna Trinidad, okay? She is a PCOS educator, she's an advocate, and she's a content creator. And I'm excited to have her with me today. Hey, Tianna, girl.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, sis. When I was looking for people to have talk about this, when I seen a lot of creators for PCOS content, a lot of them did not look like us. And there are so many Black women who are affected by PCOS. I felt like it was only effective to have the conversation with someone who could relate to our experience with it. Not that, anybody else's experience isn't valid, but more so, I think that some of our symptoms are not taken as seriously, and some of the advocacy for Black women is not as high as other women. So, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you anymore.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I feel like my PCOS journey left me very helpless at certain points in times, and we'll get into that. But I actually want to hear about your story because you have a bunch of different components about your PCOS story that I want to tackle today. But tell me about why you became an advocate. Tell me about your PCOS journey, and ultimately what made you want to start helping other women.
Okay, so I want to start off with I knew that I had PCOS for a while, right? I wasn't like those women who didn't know. I knew. I just was told in such a casual way. I found out during an urgent care visit. I actually was going to the urgent care being treated for recurrent UTIs, or so I thought.
Mm,
I was experiencing this lower back pain. It would happen like once a month. I would go to the urgent care. My urine would come back clean, but they would give me antibiotics prophylactically. And because I would take the antibiotics for a few days, I would associate the time with a decrease in pain as like, one a cause and effect thing. And I would think, all worked, right? And I continued to going to the urgent care till one day a doctor told me, I'm not giving you any antibiotics. I've looked at all of your records. Your UTI has never come back dirty. Like all of the times in the lab, it's never come back dirty. We're not giving you antibiotics. We think you have something different called PCOS. I want you to go to your PCP and I want you to ask them to give you an ultrasound and this. And I just remember being like flabbergasted. Like, what is the cyst? Where? What do I tell my doctor? And just being like, kind of like in a very loose disbelief about what he was saying. And when I
mhm,
told my doctor kind of gave me pushback. And that was the only reason why I kind of pushed for it because I was curious at this point. I was like, now I want to know. And I got an ultrasound. And at the time, now I know that I had polycystic ovaries, but at the time I was told everything was normal, no changes.
mhm,
Do you want birth control? No, come back when you want to get pregnant. So
mm,
and I was a registered nurse, right? I worked in NICU, labor and delivery. I there was no teachings of this in nursing school. It wasn't commonly discussed. It was just something that I understood that when I wanted to have a baby, it would be difficult. I would need IVF, I would need birth control. And it was just something that I was willing to discuss later in life. Um,
yeah.
and so I knew my mom had some PCOS. I knew she had some hormonal issues. She had one ovary removed. She struggled to have my sister at 23 weeks. She was given zero chance to live, and it was
Wow.
just a really traumatic point in my life where I decided to become a registered nurse because my sister was given zero chance to live. Right? They said that she wouldn't last past 24 hours, and this was my
Mm,
mom's miracle baby. So a little bit about my background, right, summed up. So I knew there were some issues, but I didn't really know the pieces that made this story whole. I didn't know. I just thought that it was just a fluke. It was just some women got pregnant and some women don't. Some women do IVF and women like me, we just don't. And I just went through life with that understanding. I went through nursing school. I became an L&D and a NICU nurse. And very quickly, the healthcare system kind of like destroyed what I thought I knew. And so when my time came, and by this time I had a master's degree, I went back to law school. Um, I went, I was married, I went to have my first baby, and I got pregnant rather quickly. So for me, PCOS wasn't even an option. I was like, okay, I got pregnant. Like, I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I picked from a straw and I didn't get the short one. Right.
Mm.
And so I worked full time, and then I started to feel some kind of way. Started to feel like
Mm.
I can only describe it like a mother's intuition. I felt like something was off. I tried to tell my coworkers, I tried to tell the doctors that I work with, and it was just like, you're young, you're healthy, you've never been pregnant, it's all in your head. You work in the NICU, you deal with high risk pregnancies and deliveries every day, like, you're fine. And so I remember on December 26th, the day after Christmas, after I finished opening everything for this baby boy that I named Logan, I remember driving
Mm.
outside city limits to find a different hospital system just because I wanted like a really thorough analysis because I had been cramping, I had been feeling some kind of way. And I discovered that my pregnancy was no longer viable. Um,
Mm.
my baby lost his heartbeat. And I remember not remembering anything after that. Like, I remember people
Mm.
talking. I remember them moving very slowly. I remember my husband trying to console me. I remember going home still pregnant
Mm.
because in Florida, like there was like this touch and go about right what's going on with women when the body doesn't recognize that the pregnancy is no longer viable. So I had the situation where I was technically pregnant, but the pregnancy wasn't viable, and my
Mm.
options were very limited in how I was going to go about. And I knew based on what I did and my experience as a nurse, and that I just wanted that situation to be put to rest in the gentlest way.
Yeah.
And I felt like I met so much rigidity, and I was
Mm.
just so shocked and overwhelmed because I'm like, I do this every day for a living.
Yeah.
Where's the compassion for me? And
Mm.
so I remember having to pay a private doctor, pay a private clinic, having to have their staff on call for me 24 hours. And just between Christmas and New Year's, just a gap in my memory of really like of that time. But I remember not wanting to take any pain medications because I needed
Mm.
to feel every piece of it. I wanted to live through every moment of it, even if it was painful. It was my experience to have. And I remember after like that Whitney Houston song, like Where Do Broken Hearts Go? I remember searching for the place that broken hearts go. Like, okay, so where do I put the pieces back together? Okay, like, so I spent my whole life being a healer, being a rescuer, creating my whole identity around becoming a nurse, right? I was like a town hero. I got a $40,000 scholarship to become a nurse because I saved my sister's life. Like, where
Mm.
was the parade like for me now? Like, who was coming to save me? And like 6 weeks
Mm.
after I took off of work, I got a call from my director, and she was like, "You need to come back to work. Like, people go through this all
Mm.
the time. Like
Oh, wow.
actually my neighbor went through this, and she went right back to work. You are highly special. We can't just get someone to fill your position. You have to come back." And I came back because I feel like as a woman of color, we often correlate our productivity to our self-worth. And so
Mm.
I wanted to, like, I was so broken that I went crawling back. And within a few days, I got a call from HR, and they were like, um, what happened? Was this a loss of pregnancy intra utero, or did you give birth? And I was like, what?
What? Why is that your business?
And they were like, well, based on our HR policy, we do not cover pregnancy loss, and you take 7 days of
Jesus.
bereavement. so we're going to need you to pay this back, but we can do a payment plan. And I was like, can I call you guys right back? And I walked out of my dream job, and I never went.
Mm,
And I remember just being like, I get choked up about it because that was like, I remember being like 13 and getting a certificate from the Babysitters Club. Like, I just lived to serve.
mm-hmm.
Felt like when I was the most broken, I was just like tossed away. And I was literally like crying out for help. Like, I was
Yeah.
so overweight. I went 6 months in a pregnancy that was not viable. I had all of this extra pregnancy weight. I had anxiety, I had depression, I had a hole in my heart that time couldn't heal. And I was just like a number. I was just like someone to fill a spot, to fill a void. And no one was hearing me that I was broken, that I was seeking something. Something that I couldn't explain. That having that void, not having anything to show that I was a mother and that I had
Mm,
gone, like I had like these internal scars, and it was just so debilitating because I felt like the world was supposed to stop on its axis when I lost my baby, and it just kept going, and I couldn't understand how the world didn't respond to my grief. And so Love Surf Warm came as like that birth between like that space where like it's like all or nothing. It's like total like self destruction or self preservation. Love Surf Warm came out of like a prayer, like in the middle of the night, like between me and God, just like begging for Him to save my life, for Him to give me something to live
mm,
for. And I was just like, I promise God, if you make me a mom, if you give me this chance, I will take so many women along the route with me. Like, I
mm,
won't even take any of the credit. And that's why it's called Love Serve Warm. It's because that's the missing piece in healthcare. Like, that's the service that I want to lead with and from. Like, I want women to feel like when they connect with me, like they're in that safe space, like they can finally exhale because they know that they're going to be served from like the highest capacity because I was them.
mm. Oh, girl, I got chills over here listening to you talk. And I'll be transparent with you. I've been very on the fence about kids. I will say that when I was diagnosed with PCOS and endometriosis, I think for me, the choice being taken away from me made it a lot harder. I was never one of those people who was like, oh, I got to be a mom, like after a certain point. When I was younger, grew up in Texas, very religious, I wanted to be a mom. As I started to blossom in my career and grow, I was like, I don't have to be a mom. I don't have to have kids. There's also other trauma. I talk about that on the podcast as well. But there was other things that made me just not certain that I wanted to be a mom. But I'll be honest, when I got diagnosed with both PCOS and endometriosis, it made me have a certain reckoning with myself like, dang, you'll never have that option. Or maybe there's a small desire in you that maybe one day does want to be a mom. You know what I mean? And to your point, the medical system slaps these ailments and labels on you. And it's like, well, you're going to struggle to have a kid. And so finding community, finding groups like yours, or finding someone you can lean on when you're trying to make these life decisions, because it's not just like simply, oh, I want to have a kid. It's a life decision. It's so important to have those outlets and outreaches that you can connect to when you have these ailments, right? I want you to tell me, especially because you come from a medical background, in your own situation, what were some of the biggest surprises that you found when it came to PCOS and your diagnosis and the medical system?
One of the biggest surprises I will say is that I feel like there's an intentional pipeline between IVF and between PCOS and IVF, right? There's an intentional dismissal of menstrual dysfunction symptoms in young women. I feel like there is a predatory relationship between doctors and pharmacological brands, such as like certain birth control brands. I feel like the relationship between doctors and young women, especially women of color, and the over sexualization of young women of color creates this predatory environment where birth control almost seems like a rite of passage for young women,
Mm,
and we're not discussing the negative consequences for women of color, how women of
talk
color
about it.
least or less likely to receive the follow-up care that they need, how women of
Mm,
color are less likely to have the cultural savings, the cultural abundance to be able to afford things like IVF when we are put in these
yes.
and where birth control is the first line of treatment for us, right? I feel like there is intentional disregard to menstrual education, right?
Yes.
Because of the hypersexualization of young women of color, right? And I feel like until we start to more openly have these conversations and support body advocacy and support body literacy, then PCOS will continue to be a pipeline directly into IVF. And if I can say
Mm,
something really controversial, that makes doctors to women of color what police are to black men, right?
oh, Tianna, come on. Come on, sis.
Okay. But seriously, right? Because
Yeah.
as I dive deeper into this, right, we realize that it's an intentional pipeline, right?
Mm,
When we look at agriculture and we look at what is the government investing, what are we subsidizing? We are subsidizing wheat. We are subsidizing corn, two of the most inflammatory ingredients. This is why a salad is $10 and a burger is $1. So don't come down on our community for eating or having a culture that is heavy set in carbs when this is the culture that you've created for us. This is the
yes,
life that
ma'am.
we've lived. It's based on trauma, but it's also based on what we've been able to access, right? So healing cannot look like the total opposite of what we've known for how many years, because you're creating Mount Everest. And
Mm,
the reality is that most people won't be able to tackle that, right? So we need healing to come from a different perspective. We need the conversation to be flipped, right? We need to understand the unique plight of a woman of color, how
mhm.
PCOS affects a woman of color differently. Because let's be honest, we don't see women who are not women of color walking around with mustaches and beards, right? The way we see women of color affected by these issues,
Talk about it.
cultures are affected differently,
They
right?
are.
So healing has to be addressed differently, right? And I feel like we don't want to discuss this because we know, or not we, but unintentionally, people know the power of the black dollar.
Mhm.
We start dividing and conquering, we dismantle certain systems that have been put in
Mhm.
place for a long time.
Listen, sister, I love me a Black History moment in the tea. You was giving it to us, serving it to us. No, I 100% agree with you. There are studies that show the correlation to the food we eat, why Black people, but particularly Black women, are more impacted by PCOS, which often causes high insulin, which is essentially diabetes. It makes a lot of people who have it high risk of getting diabetes. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I can see immediately the economics, unfortunately, playing into how this plagues Black women. um I want to share a little bit of my story because this last year, if I'm being honest, Tiana, PCOS dragged me by the last pieces of edges that I have. You know what I'm saying? And I really felt like for the first time in my life that I was just completely out of control of my body. And to your point, I had so many signs over the years that I had PCOS, and no doctor, no gynecologist ever said like, hey, let's see. They did an ultrasound. I was like, everything looks good. Keep it moving. There was no further research to try to decide or determine or even rule out if I have PCOS. And so this journey probably really started when I was in college. When I was in college, I would get super stressed out. And then my periods would be off the chain. Like, there would be super heavy bleeding. And there was one time particularly that I bled out so much that I was like, should I go to the hospital? And then so I went to the OBGYN, and their conversation piece was, oh, we'll do an ultrasound. It's cool. You know what I mean? And this would happen often when I would get really, really stressed. So I thought, oh, okay, my period is just sensitive, right? Like I just thought that that's what we chunk it up to be. But about a year ago, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Columbus. And, I moved here to take a chance on a career, and things just did not go the way that I thought it was going to go. My boss and I had a very contentious relationship. And so it created a lot of stress because I was like, I moved to this place thinking it was going to be one thing, and then it was not, right? So I'm getting really, really, really stressed out, especially the more contentious our relationship gets. Now, I knew I had a cyst, and even with the cyst, I was never diagnosed with PCOS. So, some gynecologists will say that cysts are common, right? Everyone gets a cyst, and if it stays there for over 3 months, then maybe let's monitor it. But most women get cysts. So when I saw the cyst on the initial ultrasound, it was like, we'll just wait. If it's there, then we'll kind of figure out what we're doing. So I moved to Columbus, and again, life starts getting real off the chain here, And so I'm like really stressed out. And so of course my periods start getting really weird, as they always do when I'm stressed, which at the time didn't know was the cortisol correlation, but I'm getting really stressed. And so, it's like hard for me to get out of bed. I feel like I'm going to pass out. I feel extremely tired. I'm getting horrible cramps. And again, I'm just thinking like, oh, that's what happens when I get stressed. So, I start going back to a gynecologist. And at the time, because of COVID, there's a huge backup with medical care. You know what I mean? It might take you 6 months to get a regular appointment. And so I was searching for Black women gynecologists because when I was in the DMV, all of my doctors were Black. I found that to be a little bit harder to do in Columbus. And so, all the Black doctors here had 6 months waits. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just get a white doctor. And, because I need to be seen at this point. I don't feel normal. So, the only lady at this gynecologist's office is, of course, a new doctor, right? She looks real young and fresh, and that's no shade to new doctors, but I think that her lack of sternness or ability to make decisions impacted me greatly. So, I went to her and I said, hey, I have a cyst. I think, it's bothering me. Can we get an ultrasound? So they do an ultrasound, and this cyst is 7 centimeters on the ultrasound. And luckily, by the grace of God, there was this old gay white man who was an ultrasound tech. And he was like, honey, let me tell you, that cyst is too big. He was like, if I were you, I would get it removed. He was like, because if it's been there that long, that big, it could rupture. And that's going to be really painful. And that's going to be emergency surgery anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay. So, he tells me this information, but he's like, obviously listen to what your doctor says. So, I, of course, as a Black woman, go home and do research, which I'm seeing all these things. And then I'm also seeing the stories of people who are having rupture cysts, and they say it's painful as hell. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to get it removed because it's been there for over a year. It's not shrinking, and I don't want it to get bigger and cause more pain. So I go to the doctor and I'm like, hey, so, you see the ultrasound. What do you think? She was like, it's a cyst. What do you think? Girl, you're my doctor. What the hell do you think? And so it was her lack of, trying to help me make an educated decision. Like, I didn't go to medical school. You're a whole gynecologist. Give me my options. Tell me what it means to have that big of a cyst sitting in my uterus. Like, you know what I mean? What are the options? And so we scheduled a surgery because, like I said, I was kind of like, you know what? I want to get it taken out. And I remember a friend saying to me, "Girl, you don't even trust this lady and you would allow her to do surgery on you?" And I was like, "Ooh, that's a great point."
Yeah.
So I went ahead and started looking for other gynecologists. And again, the issue is the wait. So I called this other place kind of close, and I was like, "Listen, I need a really good doctor, like a really good doctor." And so they said, "Oh, this lady is really good." So I go to this new gynecologist, and she's 1,000% better. White woman still, but she was a gay white woman. And I point that out to say is I think she's a minority in her own right. So she understands that what it's like to not be heard. And so I think it was her mission to ensure that as a Black woman, I felt comfortable coming to her with my medical needs. So, she was like, "I'm willing to do the surgery. We can do it around that time." And so I said, "Okay, yeah." So we get the surgery done. This cyst was 10 centimeters, and it was hanging off of my fallopian tube. So it wasn't even on the ovaries. It was literally hanging off the string, that is the fallopian tube. And so when they cut me open, that's when they found PCOS because of the way that my ovaries looked, but also they found endometriosis on my uterus and on my bladder. And so, immediately I hear those things and I'm like, "Oh God, you know, is this like a fertility curse because endometriosis and PCOS?" It's like I got the double dozen. So I'm like, I don't know what this means, but I had like, an immediate thought to myself like, dang, you always wanted the choice to choose if you had children or not, but it feels like you won't get the choice having both. Having PCOS is one thing, having endometriosis is one thing, having them together felt like if you want to have children naturally, it's out the window. And one of the reoccurring themes throughout this entire process was like birth control, birth control, birth control. And I did not want to be on birth control. I still do not want to be on birth control. But my periods got to a point that were so bad. Like I was having 2 periods a month. I've always had heavy bleeding. I don't think I considered it to be heavy bleeding until I realized that it wasn't normal.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I don't want to take birth control. That's all y'all want to give to me. And luckily my second doctor was more willing to like see different options. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, I had to go to YouTube University to really learn like what are healthy alternatives to help me aid my PCOS. Because while I felt like endometriosis for sure, maybe was the cramping, PCOS was running me ragged. Okay, my hormones were all over the place. My acne, I always felt tired. I always couldn't sleep at night, but I'm sleepy all day. And I didn't learn that half this stuff was PCOS until I did my research. And so I realized, unfortunately, that I was going to have to make several lifestyle changes in different ways in order to help me with PCOS. But like that 1 year, I felt like my body failed me. I felt like the medical system failed me. And I felt like nobody could really help me put the puzzle pieces together. So, you know, I appreciate getting on the internet and seeing content like yours because, again, when I first started my research, all I'm seeing is white women. And again, I'm not saying that white women cannot help you be PCOS advocates, but it was nice to come to your page and see a Black woman sharing things that could help me because that representation does matter and it does affect us a lot differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you know, when it comes to PCOS and how you help women, what would you have told Leah a year ago that was confused, tired, felt overwhelmed, and felt like the medical system couldn't help her? How would you start to help someone who was in my position?
Well, first things first is that I will say is this, and I think it's so important for not only like the past version of Leah, but to like all of the women who are struggling, that until you make the unknown known, it will rule your life and you will call it fate,
Mm,
right? And I think that's so important because I think so often women are thinking or they attribute their PCOS symptoms to their personality traits. I'm just lazy. I just lack motivation. I just lack drive. I just lack. No, you are dealing with hormone dysregulation that is affecting you. You are dealing with high functioning anxiety. You might be dealing with depression. You are battling against irregular blood sugars that are messing with your mood swings, right? You are irritable because you are not ovulating, right? And so often it's like, are you truly an angry Black woman or are you just not ovulating? So you're not making progesterone. Therefore, you're more moody and you're more irritable. Right. So I think that's the first thing is truly like listening to your intuition, right? Despite what everyone else may say, because statistics shows that average woman takes about 5 years and 50% of women with PCOS are undiagnosed. And it takes a woman up to 5 years and up to an average of 3 different doctors before she can be diagnosed with PCOS, right? So the mountain is steep. So with that being said, I wouldn't make the diagnosis my end all be all, right? It's just a cherry on top. What I would make my end all be all is the symptoms that you're experiencing, irregardless of what anybody else deems as common, right? Because I feel like the issue in our community is because things are so common, we deem it as normal, and it's not normal. We are suffering. These symptoms are whispers into a hormonal dysregulation that will become a scream later if we don't learn to acknowledge the whispers. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I want to say to the previous Leah is what companies would benefit from women of color stopping the lifestyle changes that leads to cysts, right? And you really have to think about the socioeconomics of things, follow the money, right? So when Black women or women of color in general are experiencing these issues, right? And it seems like your only line of treatment is birth control, you have to stop and question why, right? Because birth control will silence all of your symptoms, right? And why is that? It's because if the healthcare system moved from pharmacological intervention to truly addressing the root cause, we would have to start having honest conversations about the things that Black women are doing, the things and the companies that we are actively participating in that are the sole cause of some of the hormonal imbalances that we're experiencing, right? Because it's the foods that we eat, it's the things that we put on our skin, it's our candles, it's our cleaning products, it's our,
Mm,
and we don't want to have these conversations. So it's easier for them to just hand you birth control, silence your
yep.
symptoms, and but this has led to the explosion of autism and kids with
Mm,
disabilities and a generation that is longing for root cause healing. And this is where we are because we have allowed our government to be bought out. We allowed our politicians to be bought out because the FDA is not protecting us because we are
yep.
educated enough as consumers to know the difference between fun marketing on the front and educational marketing on the back, right?
Mm,
We're allowing these companies to get away with too much at our expense, at our children's expense.
mm,
And that's the biggest problem. It's like I don't expect young Leah with very little information to be able to go against these multi-billion-dollar companies that are using your favorite artists to promote products and things that they would never introduce to their homes and
mm.
cultures.
Come on, Tiana. I'm just sitting back and listening because, you know, these things really do impact our community so much. So I want you to tell me about you as a mom after experiencing loss like that and then being able to carry two healthy pregnancies. Tell me about what advice you would give to women who are diagnosed with PCOS, who are diagnosed with endometriosis, who believe that those diagnoses will really keep them from having healthy pregnancies and babies. What advice would you give them if they want to start this journey to do this naturally? Because I know that's one of the things that you offer. So what tips would you give them if they're going to start their fertility journey with PCOS?
I think that the most important thing to note is that the eggs that you are carrying, or the egg that conceived you, was carried by your grandmother, right? So it's so important to understand how this works on a deep level. It's so important to understand that from the time you are born with all the eggs, all the follicles that you will ever have. You're not getting any more. Okay. So it's important to understand that the time from which you are indecisive on whether you want to have kids to the time that you have made the solid decision to have children, you are carrying the unfertilized follicles of those future children. And I say all of that to say that whether or not you want to have children, if the thought is even there that you might want to become a mom someday, you got to start handling your blood sugars today. I think
Mm,
that something that is not commonly discussed with women of color. We are very dismissive over it. The doctors are not checking insulin resistance. They're not checking your fasting insulin resistance. They're only checking your blood sugar. And your blood sugar will do the Brit and job. Despite you having insulin resistance, your blood sugar will remain normal until it's too late. Okay, by the time your
mm,
A1C starts showing issues, you have already passed insulin resistance. You have already been in that red zone for far too long. And I want you to understand that the science is very premature, but you have to understand that PCOS is diabetes of the ovaries, and
mm.
Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. So even though
Wow.
the research is premature, you have to understand that women with PCOS are on a fast track to not only develop diabetes, but to later develop Alzheimer's, right? We have to understand the
Mm,
way that this disease, the way that this is onsetting in us, the way that it will cause issues with us, right? With the whole trend of Ozempic, right? There are brands that are looking to specifically molecularly adjust the food so that it works against the GLP ones. We are truly coming into a space where we've got to be educated about the things that we put into our mouth, because it will not only affect us, it will affect the generations that come from us. And I think that the issues that we're seeing is a direct consequence of the convenience and the life that we're living right now. I think that 100 years ago, kings and queens didn't have access to some of the things that we have, and we've entered a period of like overstimulation, where it's almost become like a rite of passage to eat right and work out, right? In a era where Ozempic reigns, where GLP ones rule, right? We've got to get back to the basics.
mm. Oh, that's good. Hold on. So wait, run back the Alzheimer's situation, because I'm not gonna lie. Ever since I got diagnosed with PCOS, I'll be honest, I experienced a lot of brain fog. And even here recently, I find myself forgetting a lot. So what is the correlation with PCOS and Alzheimer?
So the thing that people like, all the brain is the only organ in the body that doesn't have pain receptors. This is what makes Alzheimer's so dangerous. So the only sign that you will have that your brain can literally be on fire is that occasional brain fog that you experience. Might be that little headache that you experience, right? And insurances are not giving out MRIs like candy, okay? They're not willing. We live in a healthcare system that is reactive instead of being proactive. That means that it is my very educated prediction that we're going to see a major spike in Alzheimer cases from women with PCOS. And we are already seeing the premature symptoms in women experiencing brain fog so early. I have some clients as early as 30 who are already going into perimenopause, and they don't know that menopause is labeled by you just not having a period for 1 year. That puts you into menopause, right? And a lot of women haven't had period in years. They walk into the kitchen, they don't remember what they were going to get, right? I work with some nurses who are like, my job is on the line because I can't remember life-saving things for my clients. And we are brushing it under the rug as normal. Young people, we can't remember, like, we don't even remember our cell phone numbers, right? And we are not, again, because if we have the real, honest, raw conversations about our symptoms, we have to have the conversation of where they're coming from. What are we doing that's leading to the brain fog? What are we doing that's literally rotting our brain? Where is the inflammation coming from, and what can we do to reverse it? We don't want to have these conversations. So we write it off as normal. We allocate our productivity to our self-worth. We create like the hustle culture. We have like we relabel our addictions, right? And that's just the society that we're in right now. I believe that Alzheimer's is going to run rampant. I believe it is already running rampant, and I believe that if we truly look, right, because I feel like women of color have to be protected so much because we're often the start of things, right? So if you look, higher education first became unavailable to like women of color. No one was listening. Then it became unavailable to everyone, right? Housing first became unavailable to women of color. No one was listening. Then it became, right. It always starts on these levels, right? When PCOS was just a thing of women of color, like it, but then it's right. It always starts that spark that way. And I truly feel like when it comes to Alzheimer's and kidney disease, when we look at the ghettos, right, we can already see the Alzheimer's clinic popping up on every clinic, on every corner. We see the
Mm.
dialysis centers are popping up on every corner. What do they know that we don't know? What are they preparing for? I mean, the writings are on the wall.
Sister, you're dropping the bombs, and I just can't even keep up. It's so good, but that's really good. I didn't even think about the fact that like the brain doesn't really have a pain indicator. So like anything going on with your brain other than like a minor headache or brain fog. Oh girl, you got me like I need to start doing some Sudoku puzzles, some to save my brain. But no, absolutely, I 100% agree, and it really is the food. I mean, there's if you even look at women when they starting their periods like decades ago. Like it was very rare for girls to like start having puberty at like 8 and 7 and 6, and it's getting younger and younger. Like younger girls are developing like breast tissue. They're really it's the food. When you go anywhere around the world and you see like a piece of chicken somewhere else compared to in the US. Like I went to Kenya and I ordered like a 6-piece wings, and I was like, y'all gonna have to bring me at least 16 more because what the hell is this little? But point being is it really isn't our food. It really is not a lot of regulation anymore. I think, if you pay attention to politics and you pay attention to the policies, there have been a lot of safeguards for food that have been taken off. You know what I mean? They are really allowed to put a lot of crap in our food, and it's unfortunate if you aren't doing the research or know to do the research or have the money to buy otherwise. So it truly is affecting our people and our community in every single aspect. So 100% agree with you. Well, listen, we know you got all the knowledge. We know that you are giving all the jewels. If people want to do any of your programs, and you have a couple different programs, so you can tell everybody about those and where they can connect with you and learn more about Tianna, please let everybody know where they can go.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. So, if you're looking to reverse your PCOS symptoms, get pregnant with PCOS, or just get any information about PCOS, you can reach me at lovesurfwarm.com or lovesurfwarm on all social media platforms.
Okay, sister. Listen, I might be scooting on over because I got to get the diet in check. I ain't even gonna lie to you. Okay, I'm a recovering big back and I'm working on it. Okay, But you know what? Honestly speaking, changing my diet drastically has changed my PCOS symptoms, and learning what my body needs in order to function in a proper state. So you are doing the Lord's work for the women with PCOS. Oh, also tell everybody your social media as well.
Yes, thank you so much. My social media is Love Surf Warm at all platforms. So that's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Love Surf Warm.
Perfect, Tianna. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, sis. Well, listen, everybody, make sure that you like, you subscribe, you download, leave comments, let everybody know what you love about Okay And. Use that hashtag, hit us up on social media, and we will see you on the next episode of Okay And.